The shuttle's artificial gravity kicked in with a jolt just as Franklin Weaver bit into a protein bar that tasted suspiciously like chalk and regret. He grimaced, chewing anyway. His seat vibrated from the landing thrusters as the vessel touched down at Xalros Academy of Interstellar Sciences, a sprawling orbital facility where the brightest minds from across the galaxy came to study, argue, and inevitably underestimate humans. Franklin wasn't a scientist. He'd never claimed to be. He was a field ecologist, the kind who signed up for dangerous assignments with wildlife on Earth and now apparently across the stars. He'd grown up in Wyoming, spent most of his adult life outdoors, and had a resume that included tranquilizing a bull moose with a frying pan. So, when the Intergalactic Education Council needed a human to assist in xenobiological behavioral studies, Earth dispatched Franklin. Not because he was the best, but because he was available, single, and had signed the waiver without reading the fine print. He stepped off the shuttle into a wide docking bay bustling with alien students, each more baffling in anatomy than the last. Some had eye stalks, others floated, and one looked like a walking sea cucumber wearing an academic robe. A thin, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms and no visible mouth greeted him. "You are Franklin Weaver," it asked. "That's me," he said, adjusting the strap of his duffel bag. "I am Veltri, your department liaison. Follow." Veltri walked, or more accurately, hovered through a corridor lined with glimmering panels and softly clicking lights. Franklin kept pace, trying not to gawk. He'd been briefed about the Academy's focus on xenofauna, but the scale of it didn't hit him until he passed a window revealing a biome dome the size of a stadium. Inside, something large and extremely toothy was tearing apart a synthetic carcass. Veltri didn't pause. "That is the Zarnathi predator. You will not be working with that." Franklin looked back at the beast. It was covered in matte black fur, stood on 4 legs, and had a tail like a wrecking ball. Its eyes glowed faintly orange. "Why not? No one works with the Zarnathi predator. It is untamable. Attempts have resulted in injury, death, or emotional trauma." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "Emotional trauma. One student believes it now haunts his dreams. He is undergoing extensive therapy." They reached a lab that smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt toast. Inside were half a dozen alien students, all clustered around a holographic screen showing footage of the Zarnathi predator pacing in its enclosure, snarling intermittently. Veltri gestured. "These are the xenofauna behavioral interns. They study predator patterns. You will assist with other terrestrial species." Franklin dropped his bag. "Why not let me try with the predator?" Silence. One of the students, a gelatinous creature with several independently blinking eyes, made a squelching noise that seemed to indicate laughter. Veltri's tone was flat. "Because it is a death sentence," Franklin shrugged. "I've worked with brown bears, wolves, even a Komodo dragon that got loose in a hotel once. At least let me observe it up close." Veltri's skin changed from blue to a subtle purple, a sign Franklin would later learn meant deep concern. "You may observe, but you will not enter the enclosure, you will not interact, you will not feed." "Understood," Franklin said. Veltri didn't look convinced. The next morning, Franklin suited up in a reinforced observation suit and entered the viewing platform above the predator's habitat. The creature classified as male specimen 3 was lying in the shade, breathing slowly, tail flicking now and then. Franklin watched for hours, jotting down notes. The way it moved, its vocalizations, its pacing patterns. It reminded him of mountain lions, territorial, suspicious, calculating. On the 3rd day, he brought a chair and a thermos of coffee. "You talk to it?" asked a voice behind him. He turned to see one of the students, a tall reptilian female with scales like polished jade. "Not really, just keeping it company." "You guys always observe in silence. Verbal interaction is deemed irrelevant. It does not respond to language." "Maybe not theirs," Franklin said, sipping his coffee. The student made a hissing noise and left. That afternoon, Franklin got an idea. He returned to the lab and requested access to the creature's feeding logs. Veltri hesitated but eventually provided them. "Why do you need this?" "I want to know what it likes." "It likes meat, all meat, and sometimes it does not eat unless it kills the prey itself." Franklin nodded. You ever tried cooked meat? Veltri blinked. Cooked, yeah, like smoked or grilled, changes the flavor, makes it richer. Why would we offer cuisine to a predator? Franklin grinned. Because it might like it. Veltri allowed him to submit a proposal. Bureaucracy moved slowly until someone noticed Franklin's notes showing the predator had stopped growling whenever he was present. 4 days later, Franklin stood outside the enclosure with a sealed container of smoked venison jerky. It had taken forever to synthesize, but it smelled amazing. Protocol requires you to toss it from behind the barrier, Veltri reminded him through the intercom. Franklin nodded and tossed a strip over the wall. The predator sniffed the air, stood, and approached cautiously. It sniffed the meat, nudged it, then picked it up in its jaws and backed away. 2 minutes later, it was chewing contentedly. Veltri sounded alarmed. It has never accepted food passively. Maybe it likes smoky flavor, Franklin said. The next day, he brought more. This time, the predator was already waiting. By the end of the week, it approached the barrier expectantly whenever Franklin appeared. It no longer bared its teeth or paced aggressively. It sat, it watched. It even made a throaty rumble that didn't sound like a threat. Veltri was baffled. It should not be possible. It has no known pack bonding behavior. Maybe it thinks I'm a really weird-looking packmate. The students began treating Franklin like an anomaly. They whispered, watched him constantly, even recorded his interactions. One tried tossing meat himself. The predator ignored it. Franklin, curious, began reading its body language more closely. The way its ears moved. The way it tracked his hands. He started talking to it softly, not expecting comprehension, just familiarity. Then came the breach. A maintenance drone malfunctioned and crashed into the enclosure. The predator, startled, went into a frenzy. Security alarms blared. The observation deck sealed. Franklin, who had insisted on being closer that day to test vocal responses, was still inside. "Get him out of there," Veltri shouted, but Franklin was already moving. He didn't run. He crouched slowly, hands open. Hey, it's just a drone, not your fault." The predator turned toward him, chest heaving, eyes wild. Franklin reached into his pack and pulled out a strip of jerky. The beast snarled. "Yeah, I know, you're scared, so am I." The predator inched forward. Franklin didn't move. The creature sniffed his hand, then, with a low grunt, took the jerky and backed off. Security breached the door minutes later. Franklin was fine, sweaty, shaken, but alive. The academy was stunned. Veltri summoned him. "No one has ever calmed that creature during active aggression. It should have killed you. Guess it likes me. This is not a guessable phenomenon. We do not understand what has happened." Franklin leaned back, exhausted. "Then maybe you should try asking the right questions." Over the next few weeks, Franklin was granted supervised access to the enclosure. The first time he stepped inside, the predator approached cautiously, then sat beside him like a massive, furry shadow. He called it Dust. Dust tolerated brushing, target training, even allowed Franklin to check its paws for wounds. The bond was real, documented, unexplainable. Students from across the galaxy came to observe. Some tried to replicate it. None succeeded. Veltri finally admitted, "We must reevaluate our assumptions." Franklin chuckled. "Good starting point." But not everything was smooth. During a routine checkup, Dust became agitated when a bot injected it with a sedative for testing. It leapt, striking the bot, which crashed into Franklin, slamming him against the enclosure wall. Pain exploded through his side. He collapsed, gasping. Medical teams rushed in. He was diagnosed with 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Recovery would take weeks. Dust, after the incident, refused food for 3 days. When Franklin returned to the observation deck in a sling, Dust lifted its head, then slowly approached the barrier. "Miss me, big guy?" Dust made a low sound, not a growl, something softer. Veltri offered him a cane. "This is not wise." "I'm not going in," he said, "just watching." Dust rested beside the wall, watching him in return. Franklin smiled. "Yeah. I'm not going anywhere either." Franklin's ribs ached when he laughed, so naturally, the reptilian medic with the translucent eyelids decided to tell him a joke during the bandaging process. 3 Autharians enter a vacuum chamber," it said, threading a sterile wrap under his arm. "One says, 'I thought this was a restaurant.'" Franklin stared at it. "I don't get it," the medic sighed. "Neither do I. That's the joke." The clinic was quiet except for the soft hum of diagnostic panels and the occasional beep from the vitals monitor attached to his wrist. He hated the thing. It flashed red every time he moved wrong, which was often. The door slid open and Veltri entered, holding a small data slate and a frown that seemed to be etched into his very skin. "You are not cleared for mobility," Veltri said. "Good to see you too," Franklin replied, carefully adjusting his sling. Veltri ignored the sarcasm and tapped the slate. "Your presence in the observation deck is being formally reviewed. Several departments have expressed concern." Franklin scratched at the adhesive strip on his collarbone. "Let me guess. They think dust imprinted on me and now it's a security risk." Veltri paused for half a second too long. "That is a simplification. Don't worry, I'll simplify some more. I didn't train it. I didn't sedate it. I didn't bribe it with alien pheromones. I gave it jerky and talked to it like I would a neighbor's dog. You are not permitted to compare it to a domestic canine. Then maybe you shouldn't let it sit beside me like one." Veltri turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Your next review is in 4 days. Until then, you are confined to medical." "Great. I'll work on my tan." When Veltri was gone, Franklin reclined against the angled cushioning and stared at the ceiling, which tried to simulate a blue sky but ended up looking like an aquarium with performance issues. Hours passed. The nurse, a floating orb with 20 retractable arms, checked on him periodically, but said little. Franklin drifted between naps and mild annoyance until the door opened again, this time revealing someone he didn't recognize. She was tall, bipedal, and covered in short fur that shimmered faintly under the lighting. Her eyes were a deep violet, and she wore a dark robe that marked her as faculty, not student. "I've read your incident report," she said without introduction. "Do I get points for style or just survival? You interrupted a defensive outburst with a food item and soft vocalizations. That's not style. That's either delusion or instinct." Franklin gestured to the chair beside him. "Plenty of both to go around." She sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm Professor Salen. I oversee predator cognition studies. You're late to the party. I prefer to arrive after the blood dries." They sat in silence for a moment before she continued. "When you first entered the enclosure, what were you thinking? That I was probably going to get bitten somewhere inconvenient, and yet you went in. I've been around enough animals to know when they're waiting for something to make sense. Dust didn't want violence. He wanted familiarity. That's not a scientific term, but it's accurate." She tilted her head, considering him. "You moved toward it during the breach. That contradicts every protocol we have. Your protocols assume hostility is the default, because it usually is." Franklin shifted, winced, and stopped. Maybe the problem's not the predator, maybe it's what you expect from it. Professor Salen didn't respond immediately, then she stood. "If you're still alive in a week, I'll schedule a formal debrief." Charming bedside manner. She left without another word. By the 3rd day, Franklin's boredom reached critical mass. He'd memorized the ceiling patterns, counted the number of steps it took the nurse orb to cross the room, and attempted to make a cup of tea with one hand unsuccessfully. His ribs still throbbed when he leaned wrong, and his shoulder ached like it owed him money. The door opened once more, and this time it was the jade-scaled student who had questioned his methods before. "You're not dead," she observed. "Not yet. Give it time. I brought you something." She extended a small device with a holographic interface. Franklin narrowed his eyes. "Is it a bomb?" "It's a simulation of Dust's enclosure. Behavioral projection models. I ran them based on your interactions." He took it carefully. "You made this. I wanted to see if the bond could be replicated digitally. Spoiler, it cannot." Franklin activated the projection. A miniature Dust appeared, pacing in a translucent dome. When the simulated human approached, the creature backed away. "Why bother if you knew it wouldn't work?" "I didn't know, I suspected, but data matters more than suspicion." He looked up at her. "So what are you trying to prove?" "That you're not magic, just statistically aberrant." Franklin chuckled, then winced. "I'll take it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Does it really respond to your voice? Try singing to it sometime. Works great with grizzlies." She blinked. "That was sarcasm." He gave a lazy salute. "Only kind I've got." Later that evening, a medic with 6 legs and a clipboard informed him that he was being moved. Not discharged, just relocated to a recovery wing with more privacy and fewer hovering tools. The new room had an actual window, though it only looked out onto a corridor. Still, the bed was softer, and the lights didn't flicker when someone sneezed. The next morning, Veltri returned, accompanied by a smaller alien with an exoskeletal carapace and twitching antennae. "This is Director Jallo. She has reviewed your case." The insectoid figure observed Franklin with a series of clicks and hums before speaking. "You are an anomaly, I've been told. The creature you call Dust has displayed no signs of aggression since your injury. It has remained stationed near the entrance gate, periodically vocalizing. Sounds like it misses me. Do not anthropomorphize it. That complicates analysis." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "You want data or results?" Jallo's antennae twitched. "We want understanding. Your bond with the specimen may be useful, but only if it can be framed within controllable parameters." Franklin leaned forward slowly. "You can't control this, that's the point. You can only participate." Jallo didn't seem satisfied, but she didn't argue. "You will be granted limited access starting in 2 days. Observation only, no physical contact." "Understood." As they left, Veltri lingered. "You should know. Some faculty believe you're destabilizing the curriculum." "I didn't know empathy was against the syllabus." Veltri's expression didn't change. "They fear you are introducing unpredictability." Franklin smiled without teeth. "Then they should meet more humans." 2 days later, Franklin stood at the outer gate of the enclosure, arms still in a sling, ribs tightly wrapped beneath a reinforced vest. A guard drone hovered nearby, clearly programmed to intervene if Dust so much as shifted wrong. The gate opened. Dust was already waiting on the other side, ears forward, tail low. Franklin stepped in slowly. He didn't speak, didn't reach out. He just stood there. Dust approached, nose twitching, then sat down exactly 2 feet away. Franklin exhaled. "Hey." The creature responded with a low, rolling sound, not a growl, not a purr, but something in between, beyond the glass. Dozens of students watched, recording, whispering. Franklin didn't care. He lowered himself to the ground, carefully, one hand bracing against his knee. Dust leaned forward, nudged his boot once, then settled into a relaxed sprawl. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Remain still. The specimen is within proximity threshold." Franklin ignored it. "You're a real piece of work, you know that." Dust blinked slowly. "I take 1 hit and you go on a hunger strike. That's not guilt. That's something else." Dust flicked an ear, then yawned, a jaw stretching, fang-filled motion that would have terrified anyone unfamiliar. Franklin just nodded. "Yeah. Same." As the observation period ended, the gate opened again. Dust didn't move. Franklin stood, slowly wincing. "I'll be back tomorrow." Dust watched him go, unmoving. Outside, Veltri waited near the door. "We are expanding the study parameters," he said. "By necessity." Franklin stretched his back. "What does that mean?" "It means the Academy no longer believes the creature is untrainable. It believes you are." Franklin gave him a sideways glance. "That's supposed to be an insult or a promotion." Veltri didn't answer. Back in his room, Franklin removed the sling and flexed his fingers. The shoulder still hurt, but it was healing. He lay back, closed his eyes, and thought of Dust's stare, unblinking, steady, full of questions no one else had bothered to ask. By the end of Franklin's first week back on his feet, the novelty of being the only human in the Predator wing had worn off for everyone but Dust. The creature remained planted by the enclosure gate each morning, waiting without fail. There were no signs of agitation, no sudden lunges, and no growling. Not even a twitch of predatory tension. Staff began arriving earlier just to confirm it was real. At exactly second meal, what Franklin mentally translated as lunch, but weirdly late, he arrived with a small metal tin under one arm. His shoulder still twinged when he lifted it too fast, but most of the bruising had faded to a dull yellow. He paused outside the inner gate, where a bored-looking guard drone hovered in standby mode. Inside the enclosure, Dust saw him and stood, tail low and sweeping slowly. Franklin keyed in the access code and stepped through, setting the tin down between them. "You're not supposed to eat this," he said, opening the lid, "but I figured you earned a sniff." The contents, roasted chicken wrapped in flatbread with pickled cabbage, sent a puff of spice into the air. Dust leaned forward, nostrils flaring. He didn't lunge. He didn't even move his paws. Just inhaled deeply, then made a low, almost questioning sound. Franklin pulled a small strip of flatbread free and tossed it gently. Dust caught it midair, crunched once, and tilted his head. Then, slowly, he laid down. "See," Franklin said to the observation window. "He likes variety." The glass flickered, then Veltry's voice came through. "You are not authorized to share personal rations." "I'm not authorized to do a lot of things," Franklin replied, sitting cross-legged a few feet away from Dust. "But if you want to understand behavioral flexibility, you've got to offer stimulus that's actually different." Veltry didn't respond. The mic cut out. Dust nudged the tin, then rested his chin beside it. Franklin reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn notebook, the kind with frayed corners and a coffee stain on the back cover. He flipped it open and began sketching. "You know," he said, glancing at Dust, "there's a bear back home that used to come by my trailer every Tuesday. I left out apples, not because I wanted to train, it just figured it might like them. One day it showed up with a cub, sat there like it expected me to babysit." Dust blinked slowly like he was listening. "I didn't. But I did give them peanut butter. Bears love peanut butter." Hours passed. The lights in the dome shifted to simulate dusk, casting long shadows across the enclosure. Franklin stood slowly, brushing off his knees. "All right, same time tomorrow. Don't eat the tin." Dust rumbled low in his throat. Franklin took that as goodbye. Back in the corridor, the reptilian student, the one with the jade scales, was waiting, arms crossed. "You are treating it like a companion animal. It's responding like one. That's not science. No, it's experience. Science is what you do after you see something you didn't expect." She fell into step beside him as they walked. "Professor Saylan says the bonding is chemical, that your scent profile may contain calming pheromones. Neat. Bottle it and sell it to your department." She stopped walking. "You're not taking this seriously." Franklin turned to face her. "I'm taking it seriously enough to walk into a pen with something that could crush my spine like a celery stick. I just don't think you need a thesis to recognize trust." She hesitated. "You name it." "That's not protocol either." Neither was surviving the breach. She didn't argue further. Later that evening, Franklin returned to the medical wing for a final checkup. The nurse orb scanned him with a sweep of light and beeped twice. No inflammation, shoulder within healing range. "Ribs knitting properly, pain level?" the orb asked. 4 when I breathe deep. 8 when I laugh. You are advised to avoid comedy." "I'll do my best." Professor Saylan arrived midway through the scan. She didn't greet him, just stepped inside and examined the display. "You're recovering faster than predicted. Wouldn't be the first time someone underestimated my bones. I've requested a reassessment of the Zarnathi predators classification." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "You're reclassifying Dust. Based on your interactions, it no longer fits the profile of a Class 8 danger entity. We're proposing a downgrade to Class 6 with specific conditions." "That's a big step. Not everyone agrees. There is concern it's situational." "That your presence is a fluke." Franklin reached for his jacket. "Then let's test it. You're suggesting another breach." "No, I'm suggesting you put one of your people in there under supervision. Let Dust decide." Saylan watched him for a beat too long. "I will consider it." The next morning, things escalated. Franklin arrived to find the enclosure surrounded by faculty, students, and 2 security drones. Dust was pacing, not aggressively, but restlessly. Inside the dome, a student stood frozen a few feet from the gate, a short avian species with iridescent feathers and trembling knees. "What is this?" Franklin asked, stepping up beside Saylan. "A controlled interaction. We wanted to see if your influence could be extended by proxy." "You didn't prep him for this," he volunteered. Dust stopped pacing and turned toward the student. The silence in the room grew taut. Then Dust sat down. The student blinked, didn't move. Dust didn't either. The moment stretched, then broke with a soft, uncertain chirp from the student. Dust tilted his head. Nothing else happened. Franklin exhaled. "That's a win." "Or a delay," Saylan said, "but notable." They pulled the student out after 10 minutes. No incident, no contact. Still, it was the first time Dust had tolerated anyone else inside the enclosure. That night, Franklin was summoned to a roundtable review. Not a real table, just a circular room full of floating seats and people who looked like they'd eaten lemons and enjoyed it. The director, Xalros, was there. So were Ceylan, Veltri, and several others whose names Franklin hadn't bothered learning. Ceylan opened. Subject displays continued signs of non-aggression when Franklin Weaver is present. Proxy testing shows tolerance but not familiarity. We recommend continued supervised interaction. Another faculty member, a translucent being with pulsing veins, leaned forward. Is the subject demonstrating domestication? No, Franklin said. Dust isn't tamed. He's choosing not to attack. That distinction is academic. It's essential, Franklin countered. You're trying to explain behavior through control. I'm telling you it's about relationship. Xalros tapped a claw on the console. And what happens when you are no longer present? Then you'll see whether the bond was with me or with the species. The room fell quiet. Veltri finally said, we must decide whether to retain the predator in captivity or relocate it to a less populated station. Franklin stood. Let it go. Several heads turned. You've got your data. You've got footage, logs, interaction records. Let it go back to its natural environment. Let it use what it's learned. That's not our policy, Xalros said. Then change it. The meeting adjourned without a decision. 2 days later, Franklin stood beside the transport dock where Dust, now sedated and secured, was being loaded into a relocation vessel. He watched as the team worked silent. Veltri approached quietly. You convinced them. I didn't convince anyone. Dust did. There is one final request, Veltri said. The team wants to name the relocation site. What are they calling it? Franklin Basin, he blinked. That's awful, Veltri nodded, but fitting. The vessel doors closed with a hiss. Dust's eyes, heavy with sedation, flicked once toward Franklin. He lifted a hand. Don't eat the locals. The ship launched. Back inside the academy, the predator wing was quiet. The enclosure stood empty. Franklin walked past it, hands in his pockets, already feeling the absence like a weight behind his ribs. Professor Ceylan caught him in the corridor. You're returning to Earth. Yeah, got a moose problem in Montana. Less teeth, more attitude. She nodded once. You changed how we think. Just gave you something new to argue about. As he walked toward the shuttle bay, the intercom echoed faintly down the corridor. Attention. Predator enclosure closed until further notice. Franklin smiled. Not because it was over, but because for once, they'd let something wild stay wild.